Cliff Richard vanished from the spotlight, and for years, no one truly understood why. For decades, Sir Cliff Richard had dominated the British music charts with a level of success and endurance that few could match. With over 60 years in the industry and more than 250 million records sold worldwide, he came to be known as the Peter Pan of pop. His place in music history seemed locked. Then, without warning, one of Britain's best-loved entertainers seemingly vanished. It was not a slow fade from fame. It was as if someone had simply clicked off the light. Suddenly, the man whose voice had defined generations of British music was silent. There were no new albums, no tours, no television appearances. For someone who had been a fixture of the entertainment world since the late 1950s, the silence was deafening. This was not some temporary break or quiet retirement. It coincided with a series of deeply traumatic events that would test him more severely than anything in his long career. To put Cliff Richard's disappearance into some kind of perspective, it's necessary to appreciate the scale of what he had achieved. His career began in 1958 with a single Move It, widely regarded as Britain's first authentic rock and roll song. From that point, he became the only artist in UK chart history to score hit records in 6 consecutive decades. Music historians describe him as more than just a pop star. He was a living institution who successfully adapted to every shift in musical style, from the pre-Beatles rock era to the digital age. And when the trends changed, he never fell out of the culture. More than 130 of his singles, albums, and EPs made the UK top 20, placing him behind only Elvis Presley and the Beatles in all-time single sales. Cliff was unique not just for his chart success, but for his integral role in British life. As one record executive described him, he was as much a national fixture as the monarchy itself. His Christmas specials, his appearances at the Royal Variety, even his impromptu Wimbledon performances when rain stopped play, all these belonged to British culture. And then he just stopped appearing, leaving a hole across television, across radio, and across live performance. The man who, since 1959, had released albums almost to a yearly schedule, stopped. He had toured into his 70s, and then it stopped. Clearly, something far greater than fatigue or retirement had forced him from the stage. The turning point came on August 14, 2014. While Cliff Richard was at his home in Portugal, his life changed overnight. South Yorkshire police raided his Berkshire property in connection with an alleged sexual assault dating back to 1985. What made the raid so shocking was not only the allegation, but the way it was conducted. The BBC had been tipped off in advance and broadcast the raid live from a helicopter hovering above his house. Before Cliff had even been interviewed by police, millions watched his home being searched on television. It was an extraordinary breach of protocol that transformed a confidential investigation into a global public humiliation. For Cliff, it was an unimaginable nightmare. Friends say he learned of the raid not from authorities, but from people calling to tell him they were watching it on the news. He would later say it felt as if he was being hung out to dry before he had any chance to defend himself. The presumption of innocence was instantly stripped away. The psychological and physical toll was devastating. Those close to him reported he began trembling uncontrollably, lost weight rapidly, and developed insomnia. The once vibrant performer appeared frail and aged almost overnight. It wasn't just the accusation, said one member of his team. It was a betrayal by the police, by the media, by the very institutions he had trusted all his life. Behind closed doors, Cliff's health spiraled into crisis, a near-fatal collapse, which the public did not see. At 73, his body started to break down under the stress. He lost over 2 stone, around 20 pounds, in a few weeks. He developed shingles, an illness that can be life-threatening for someone his age. Doctors feared the unrelenting pressure could trigger a heart attack or stroke. He suffered nightmares, disorientation, and panic attacks consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder, friends said. The man who had faced it all with optimism and faith was now consumed by fear and confusion. The investigation dragged on for nearly 2 years, with no charges ever filed. During that period, Cliff lived in near total seclusion, moving between secure homes to avoid harassment. Even the most mundane tasks, such as going to a store, became impossible without the threat of photographers or hecklers. He became a prisoner, said a security consultant who worked with him. For someone whose career had been built on openness and connection with fans, that isolation was unbearable. Medical professionals would later say it was remarkable that he survived the ordeal at all. The kind of sustained stress he endured, especially at his age, can have catastrophic effects on both body and mind. But the damage was not only emotional and physical, it was financial, too. The investigation and its aftermath unleashed costs so massive they nearly destabilized even his long-established wealth. Between legal fees, canceled concerts, and lost contracts, insiders estimate his losses topped £10 million. His legal representation alone cost more than £3 million to cover both his defense and his lawsuits against the BBC and South Yorkshire Police for their conduct during the raid. The complexity of these cases called for multiple Queen's Counsel barristers and specialized legal teams. Even for a superstar of his stature, the financial strain was immense. By the time the case concluded, with Cliff Richard fully exonerated, he had endured years of isolation, health crises, and a loss of faith in the institutions he had once trusted. The ordeal left permanent scars, both personal and professional. When he finally returned to public life, it was with a quieter demeanor and a guarded outlook. The man who had once embodied openness and joy had been profoundly changed by betrayal and injustice. His disappearance, once a mystery, now stands as a testament to how swiftly fame and reputation can be shattered, and how survival, in the face of such public destruction, can itself be a triumph. Beyond the enormous legal expenses, the long-term damage to Cliff Richard's career brought far greater financial losses. He had to cancel the release of a new album and postpone his autobiography, as well as withdraw from major television appearances and concert tours. Estimates put the lost revenue from these cancellations at between £4 and £5 million. One music industry executive experienced in managing artists through PR crises explained that intangible financial setbacks also occurred, like the slump in his streaming figures, lower sales of his back catalog, and the disappearance of endorsements and appearance fees. More difficult to quantify, these represented millions in vanished income. Perhaps most painfully, Richard's property investment suffered. His Berkshire apartment, the site of the televised raid, was impossible to sell due to its notoriety. He finally sold it for more than £800,000 below its pre-raid market value. According to one financial advisor who has expertise in celebrity wealth management, the impact went far beyond any immediate expenses. At an age when most individuals would try to ensure financial stability and plan their legacy, Cliff had to liquidate investments, sell assets, and divert resources into court battles rather than retirement security. These pressures not only delayed his comeback, but reshaped how he approached the future. Recovery now required rebuilding not just his health, but also his finances after an ordeal that had shaken the foundation of a 6-decade career. After an investigation that lasted nearly 2 years, in June 2016, the Crown Prosecution Service announced that Cliff Richard would not face charges due to insufficient evidence. It should have been a moment of triumph, but for Richard, the relief was bittersweet. As one reputation management specialist explained, even when allegations are disproven, the stain often remains. Cliff knew that for some of the public, the raid and accusations would always overshadow his innocence. He took the extraordinary step to sue both the BBC and South Yorkshire Police with the goal of reclaiming his damaged reputation. The legal battle that followed lasted another 2 years. Finally, in July 2018, Richard won his case for privacy against the BBC. The judge said the corporation had invaded his privacy in a serious and sensationalist way. Although the victory brought vindication, it opened old wounds. Those close to him said he had to relive every detail through depositions and cross-examinations. It was emotionally draining and prolonged his recovery. Although the £2 million in damages, including legal costs, was not insubstantial, it represented only a fraction of his true losses. Much more important was the time he could never recover 4 years, in which he was mostly absent from the music world. Those years were priceless and irrecoverable for an artist in his 70s. By the time all legal matters concluded in 2018, nearly 4 years had passed since the original raid. During that time, Cliff Richard's once constant presence in British entertainment had vanished. The long absence and the emotional strain of repeated court battles changed his outlook entirely. When he finally began to re-emerge, it was clear that he was doing so cautiously and entirely on his own terms. The moment Cliff Richard resurfaced in public life, those who worked with him felt a clear change in his behavior. The man of tireless activity had now become choosy, cautious, and private. According to a concert promoter, he doesn't try to be everywhere nowadays. Instead, he focuses on fewer but more meaningful engagements. His touring schedule became shorter and more deliberate. Media appearances were tightly managed, with Richard insisting on control over how he would be portrayed. The new tack represented a fundamental change in priorities. Until the investigation, Cliff had been approachable and open. Afterward, his health and mental well-being became the most important thing. Cliff started to take decisions not based on public demand or profit, but on what felt emotionally right and safe. He also emerged as a powerful voice for reform, advocating greater privacy protection and responsible journalism. His 2018 autobiography, The Dreamer, was candid about the whole ordeal and its wider implications, turning personal pain into public advocacy. Observers also said Richard's comeback was less about erasing the past than incorporating it, using his platform to highlight systemic failures that nearly destroyed him and to speak for others who did not have his resources to fight back. What looked like semi-retirement to some was actually a very deliberate recalibration, a way of balancing public engagement with personal protection. His management team said the real question was never whether he could return to full activity, but whether he wanted to after such a profound betrayal by the institutions he once trusted. As Cliff Richard slowly made his way back, it became evident that a new mission was at hand: legacy protection. What the ordeal finally forced him to confront was how easily a lifetime of achievement could be overshadowed by false allegations. A close friend says it left him with one haunting question: if 60 years of music and goodwill could be wiped away in a week, what would remain of his life's work? This, he says, shaped everything he did afterward. He became heavily involved in archival projects, remastering classic recordings and curating career-spanning collections that trace his evolution over 7 decades. According to one music historian who worked with him on some of these projects, Cliff finally realized that the time had come to manage his own narrative because, if he didn't, someone else would. Nor was it just music. He became more heavily involved with charities like the Cliff Richard Tennis Foundation and several Christian organizations, knowing full well that his philanthropic work would stand beside his artistic work. For the first time, Cliff began thinking about posterity as much as performance. As one biographer pointed out prior to the investigation, he was always about the present: recording, performing, touring. Afterwards, he began to think about how his story would be remembered. Every appearance, every album, and every interview became a conscious choice in reinforcing the legacy he wanted to leave behind. This selectivity explains why his return has been more restrained than before. Ultimately, Cliff Richard's disappearance and cautious re-emergence have reflected something more than the story of one man recovering from trauma. It has shown a deep evolution in how he views fame, privacy, and purpose. His retreat was not an escape. It was a transformation. Through resilience and reflection, he turned one of the darkest chapters of his life into a determined effort to preserve the integrity of his legacy, to make sure that a lifetime of music, faith, and contribution would outshine the shadow of scandal. If you liked this, tap that subscribe button, hit the like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Tune in for more untold stories, hidden truths, and exclusive behind-the-frame peeks into the life and legacy of the world's most fascinating stars.